Well, welcome back, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parsha Pinchas. It also happens to be the first Shabbos in the 3 weeks. And it's brought down in many places that the Parshios that we read in the 3 weeks, of course, connected very much to the 3 weeks, the good part of the 3 weeks, meaning the Geula, the redemption that we look forward to. Of course, the 3 weeks is a time that we mourn the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, but on a deeper level, while we do that and while we feel the pain, we focus on the future. We focus on the positive. We focus on the Geula, the redemption that will take place with Mashiach and Mitzvah Hashem very, very soon. And of course, the Mefarshim explained that concept, that idea is emphasized on Shabbos. The Shabbos of the 3 weeks is a time we're not supposed to mourn. But we also know that Shabbos is Me'ein Olam Haba. Shabbos is like a glimpse, a preview of the Messianic time. And therefore, what happens is that on the Shabbosim of the 3 weeks is when we focus on the Geula, the redemption that is embedded and hidden within the 3 weeks. So, the 3 parshas that we read in most years, in 3 weeks, is Parshas Pinchas. The next week will be Matos Maseh, and then Devarim. So, of course, Pinchas has so much to do with Eretz Yisrael and the Geula. Pinchas, first of all, Chazal tell us, Pinchas ze Eliyahu. Pinchas is the same neshama as Eliyahu HaNavi, or whatever that means, that phrase, that Pinchas is Eliyahu HaNavi. And of course, Eliyahu HaNavi, we know traditionally is the Mevaser HaGeula. He's the one that will come and tell us the good news, the Mashiach is coming. Also, we have the Karbanis, all the sacrifices that were brought in the Beis HaMikdash on the Chagim, like all the karbonos, all the sacrifices that were brought in the Beis HaMikdash on the Chagim, the Musafim, the Musaf HaBrosh Chodesh, the daily 2 constant karbonos, the Shabbos karban, Pesach, Sukkot, and so on, all comes from Parshas Pinchas. And of course, when Yom Tov, when we talk about it, we always look forward to the time that the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt and be able to once again bring those karbonos. But also, and this is what I want to just focus on a little bit, we have in this week's Parsha the Chalukah Sa'aretz. The Torah outlines how, when the Yidden were going to go into Eretz Yisrael, which was part of the theme that was happening in this Parsha, how they're going to divide up the land. And it's a very complicated process where it's got to do with the people who came out of Mitzrayim, and the Yidden were divided in different families, and every family sort of, with a certain system, received a portion of the land in Eretz Yisrael. So the way it worked was, first of all, the different tribes. Eretz Yisrael was divided up into 12 parts to accommodate the 12 tribes. And then within each tribe, different families got different portions. So the Torah talks about it. The Torah says, one of the things the Torah says is that the way it had to be done was, begoyrol yecholek es haaretz. It had to happen through a lottery. They drew lots, and they determined which tribe was going to go into which part of Eretz Yisrael. But it wasn't just a lottery. It wasn't just a plain lottery, sort of the draw of the luck kind of thing, the luck of the draw, whatever they call it. But the whole thing also worked together with the divine inspiration that the Urim v'Tumim, the breastplate on the Kohen Gadol, was able to tell them, and it all worked together. And if you have a look at Rashi, in this week's Parsha, you see an interesting thing. Rashi says, he describes what the process actually looked like. So he says, he brings from the Gemara Baba Basra, and he says the following. Rashi says, the Hagoyrol Hoyo al pi Ruach HaKodesh. The lottery was according to Ruach HaKodesh. What does that mean? It says, brings from the Gemara, Elazar HaKohen, which of course succeeded Aaron, was wearing the Urim v'Tumim, the breastplate with a special parchment with Hashem's name. And with Ruach HaKodesh, with divine inspiration, he would say that if you're going to do the lottery, we're going to pull out a certain tribe. Let's say if we pull out Yehuda, then this is the portion that's going to go to them. And what happened was that they had 12 lottery tickets, I guess, with the names of the 12 tribes. They had 12 in a different lottery. They had 12 borders, 12 locations in the land of Israel. They would pick out a tribe, then they would pick out a portion of the land. It would always match according to what the Urim and Tumim said, and that's how they divided the land. And then Rashi adds an unbelievable thing, again, from the Gemara. So again, they would draw out a name of a tribe. Inevitably, they would draw out the correct location that was going to go to that tribe according to what the Urim and Tumim had said. And then says Rashi, the goyrol itself, because the pasuk says, b'goyrol yecholek es haaretz, that actually the land will be divided with the goyrol. So the goyrol actually had to do the dividing, so to speak, says Rashi, that the goyrol atzmoi hoyot tzaveyach v'oimer, the actual chips, the lotteries, the tickets, whatever you call it, was screaming, talked. And a voice came from the goyrol saying, Ani ha-goyrol olisi ligvul ploini l'shevet ploini. I am the goyrol, I am the lottery that has risen for this tribe corresponding to that piece of land. And therefore it's all correct. And the obvious question is, why was that so important? Now, it's learned from a pasuk, al pi ha-goyrol. Torah says that it should be done through a goyrol, but the word al pi also means based on the mouth, the word, right? Al pi means like the pear, the mouth. So according to the wording of the goyrol, that's how the division of Eretz Yisrael took place. So we learn it from a pasuk, because that's the way it was, and that's what happened. But we need to understand, why is it happening that way? Why is it so important? Especially that the most important goal here was the division of the land of Eretz Yisrael. Presumably, the goyrol itself wasn't that important. The goyrol was like a means to an end, right? So if you want to explain that it had to sort of be absolutely perfect, it had to come from all sides, it had to be the Urim B'Tumim and the goyrol itself had to speak. Why? Why does it need that perfection? Why so many layers? Why is it so important to come at us at so many different angles? When really it's not even the mitzvah itself. The mitzvah is the dividing up the land itself. So why do we need so many details and layers to be accurate and to be miraculous with the goyrol, with the lottery, which presumably was only a means to an end? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe explained a very fascinating idea on two levels, on two layers. First of all, he talked about how this works halachically, and he quoted from a famous Goyen, a famous great Talmudist known as the Rogatchover Goyen, who lived in Dvinsk, and he explains this idea. He actually draws it from the idea of a korban. When you bring a korban, so for example, we know that every korban, every sacrifice that was brought in the Beis Hamikdash, there were four critical components, avoidus, that was critical to the actual korban. Shchita, shechting the animal. Kabbalah, which means receiving the blood from the animal in a vessel. Hoilocha means walking that bowl from the place the korban was shechted to the mizbeach, and then zrika, and then it was sprinkling the blood on the mizbeach from that bowl. And every korban had a specific way of sprinkling the blood, and so on. The korban is complete. Of course, some korbanos are later eaten and mitzvah to eat them and so on, but actually the korban itself, whatever the korban had to accomplish, whether it was a sin offering that had to accomplish a particular atonement, or different kind of korban that had something else that had to accomplish, the korban was kosher, the korban was accomplished when zrika took place. Sprinkling the blood on the mizbeach was kind of the most important thing that had to happen in order to make the korban kosher. Says the Rogatchover. In other words, says the Rogatchover that therefore one would imagine that the shchita, the sprinkling, the receiving the blood, the shechting, the receiving the blood, and particularly walking the blood from the shchita to the mizbeach, were all just preparation to the actual mitzvah, and therefore they weren't that important. They weren't an end in itself. The end in itself was the sprinkling the blood on the korban. The Rogatchover said, no, that's actually not true. The Rogatchover explains that every part of the korban was an avodah. Every part of the korban was a mitzvah in its own right. It is true that the goal was the zrika, the sprinkling of blood. Why? Because he establishes a principle When you have something that is a preparation to a mitzvah, but the mitzvah cannot take place without that preparation itself becomes an end in itself. It becomes an avodah in itself, so to speak. It becomes an important critical ritual in its own right. Therefore, the mitzvah was to divide up the land of Eretz Yisrael, but the preparation to that mitzvah was a goiro, was a lottery. Therefore, that lottery should not be viewed as just a preparation to the mitzvah. That lottery needs to be viewed as a mitzvah itself. And therefore, the Torah wanted that lottery to be absolutely perfect and foolproof and absolutely clear that it was coming from Hashem. And therefore, not only did they draw the lottery, and not only did it match with the Urim V'Tumim, but the lottery itself, being an end in itself, being an entity in itself, being an avoid in its own right, screamed and created the division of Eretz Yisrael in its own way, because it was such an important component, even though it's only preparatory, even though it's only a means to an end, but it's not a means to an end. It becomes an actual avoid in its own right. That's on a halachic level. But he continues to explain this on a spiritual level. When we talk about the conquering of Eretz Yisrael, we talk about going into Eretz Yisrael, dividing up the land of Eretz, all those things. It's not only a physical, geographical concept. It's also a spiritual journey. Our own bodies, our own experience, our own life makeup is like Eretz Yisrael. We are supposed to turn our own experience, our own body, into Eretz Yisrael. There's the famous story with the Hasidic Rebbe, where a Chassid came to him who wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael. Now, of course, going to Eretz Yisrael is a beautiful thing. There are many tzaddikim that wanted to go, but the tzaddik didn't feel it was right for this person to go to Eretz Yisrael. And he told him, Machdo Eretz Yisrael, make your own environment Eretz Yisrael. And that's what we're supposed to do. Eretz Yisrael also, besides being a geographical location, it's also Eretz Yisrael comes from the word, the Gemara says, it's called Eretz, but we always refer to it as Eretz. Why is Eretz? Because it wants to do the will of Hashem. When we turn our own environment into a place, into an entity that wants to do the will of Hashem, that is committed to the word of Hashem, that is surrendered to the will of Hashem, that's creating the Eretz Yisrael, the spiritual Eretz Yisrael in our own experience. When we do that, there are different parts of our life. Sometimes we do that by doing actual mitzvahs, by serving Hashem directly, by doing things that are directly linked to avodas Hashem, learning, davening, doing a mitzvah, putting on tefillin, giving a tzedakah, lighting a Shabbos candle, whatever the case is. And then there are those things that are preparation. They're preparation for the mitzvah. What the story of the lottery teaches us is that preparation is so important that although it's leading to something there, but when you are in the preparation, you have to be completely present, completely there, and immersed and involved and fully there. It's got to be complete. The preparation must be complete as well. The Rebbe told a story, famous story of a Hasidic Rebbe called the Rebbe Rashab. And the Rebbe Rashab, this is the previous Rebbe's father, and the Rebbe Rashab was once having a Farbrengen with students of his, with Hasidim of his. And the Farbrengen style would work that he would say a talk, a Hasidic discourse, a Hasidic idea, and then he would stop and they would say L'chaim, and then they would sing a nigun. And the nigun was kind of like a space between the talks, a time to reflect on what the Rebbe had said, a time to prepare for the next talk. And then the nigun would come to an end and the Rebbe would give the next talk. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to have the same sort of format. And that's how Farbrengen went. And once when the Rebbe Rashab was leading a Farbrengen, the Hasidim were very eager to hear his talks. That's why they were there. They wanted to drink from the deep wisdom of the Rebbe Rashab. When it came time to sing a nigun, he noticed that the Hasidim were rushing up the nigun. They were singing it quickly because they wanted the nigun to come to an end so they could hear the next talk from the Rebbe. The Rebbe noticed them and he stopped them and he said, this is incorrect. This is not how you do it. He used the word, you have to be a pnimi. A pnimi means that whatever you're doing, you have to be doing fully. You cannot be thinking about something else. When you finish what you're doing, then you immediately go to the next thing. with alacrity, with great enthusiasm. But when you're there, you have to be there. And he said, even though the nigun is a preparation, the nigun is a preparation, the song is a preparation for the next talk. When you're singing the song, you have to be fully there. And the Rebbe says this is the lesson we learn from this week's Parsha, from the Goyrel. The Goyrel became a dramatic experience. The Goyrel became a thing that it was implied with the Urim V'Tumim. It was drawn with great fanfare to the point that the Goyrel itself spoke. Speech is one of the ways we express ourselves. When we're involved in something, we can think about it, we can do it, and we can speak about it. The Goyrel happened on all levels, miraculously. But it's to teach us a lesson that when we make our Eretz Yisrael, we shouldn't rush the preparation. Even the things which we do, which seem like not an end to itself, but seems like just a preparation, whether it's doing business in order to live a life of Torah and mitzvahs, to give tzedakah, whether it's buying food for Shabbos, whatever the case is, whatever we're doing has to become part of serving Hashem. And although it's a preparation, it has to be with full presence of mind, being immersed in that experience, knowing that whatever you're doing is really a part of serving Hashem. In other words, by the way, this predates many, many, many years to the, obviously it comes from the Chumash, this idea, this lesson, but the story even predates the modern mindfulness movement, which is an ancient concept in Torah, but with a much more greater depth, that whatever you're doing becomes an end in itself, not just being present every experience, like, in a preparation, but that everything becomes the kavanah, that becomes the intention, it becomes the purpose of life, if you do it meaningfully. And this is the concept that in Yiddishkeit, there is no real means to an end. Yes, there is an end in a lot of times, but really everything we do is a part of serving Hashem, and therefore everything we do has to be fully done with all its details and with the enthusiasm and with the simcha and with the proper presence of mind, because really it's as important as the end as well. That's the lesson from the lottery experience. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.